Hello, and welcome to Vermont Interfaith Action's Conversation with Candidates 2020 General Election Edition. VIA is a faith-based grassroots community organizing project made up of 64 member and affiliated congregations throughout the state. We work together as a coalition, including the Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, Unitarian Universalist, Buddhist, and Muslim traditions. Our goal is to effect systemic change around issues that are identified at the grassroots level. Issues that affect the families and individuals who attend our congregations and whom we reach out to in our communities. In the years past, VIA has hosted events across the state in order to hear from candidates about the issues VIA leaders and clergy are concerned about. This year, we have invited the gubernatorial candidates to fill out a questionnaire and join us for a 20-minute conversation about their answers. Today, I'm joined by David Zuckerman of Hinnesburg, Vermont. David, welcome.
Well, thank you. Pleasure to be here. I really appreciate it, Joshua, and all the folks who are maybe going to be watching this over the next month and trying to figure out where you want to put your vote in this governor's race between, I think you've got two good choices. So I wish you well in your decision.
Thank you. And so our first question is this. So let us begin. The news has been filled with incidences of unarmed men and women being shot by police and the subsequent rallies and protests held all over the country in reaction. What would you do to address the systemic racism that permeates so many of our institutions, from law enforcement to housing, to healthcare, to employment, to education, and beyond?
Well, there's a lot to that question, but it is critically important in this day and age. It's been an important question, frankly, for decades and centuries as the systemic racism has permeated our system. I'll first talk briefly about cannabis reform, which I started working on back in the late 90s as a legislator. Folks think it was because I was a coming out of college student consumer of cannabis, but really in college I learned about the history of how it became illegal, the racist practices around stigmatizing the plant, and then how Nixon in particular used cannabis as well as the war on drugs to really disproportionately suppress the civil rights movement and the peace movement in the 60s and early 70s. And when you look at that history, you then start to really learn how the whole war on drugs has been very disproportionately impactful on our Black and brown brothers and sisters. And as you learn each of these different instances, whether it's drug policy, whether it was redlining, whether it's different issues that are both systemic and culturally systemic, as well as politically systemic, you realize how much work we have to do. When we know that Black and brown individuals on average have about 1/10 the accumulated wealth of the average white person, you've got to wonder, why is that? Unless you are straight out blatantly racist and think, well, because they're only 1/10 capable of earning money or being productive, then you've got to really look at the reality, which is that our system has not valued everyone in our society for their individual abilities and what they can do. We have a system that truly is unequal. So we have to look at everything from top to bottom, including ourselves, always looking introspectively, looking at how we can learn about our own both biases and advantages that we've had, and then look also at, as government, what are the ways we can remove systemic racism. We can work to include more Black and brown voices in the conversation at high levels in government, both therefore bringing those voices to the table as policies are being created, and elevating individuals so that there are role models for others in the community to see that people like them can be in positions of power. I think that is one of the big breakthroughs that's starting to happen right now. Is if you don't create a system where there is hope and opportunity for young people, they will never aspire to get somewhere because they know they're not going to get there. I think about our education system and the disproportionate number of suspensions and detentions in our schools that happen because of implicit bias and internalized biases by teachers and school administrators. It's not through fault of their own. This is systemic in the way we've learned it through media, through government, and everything else. So as a leader, it's really important to not only bring people into the process as we make laws, it's important to review our laws, as we have with criminal justice laws. We have to look at our education laws, what we teach. We have to think about more trainings around bias, both in law enforcement, teaching, and all aspects of government and ourselves. And we need to bring more voices into the table, into the conversation, not as an afterthought at the end of a policy development, but right from the beginning.
Thank you for that response. Another big concern during this time is in regards to housing. All across the state, housing is unaffordable for many Vermonters. As the people of faith, we believe housing is a basic necessity. What would you do to create more affordable housing and prevent homelessness in our state?
Well, thank you. I have stood outside, sadly, on the State House steps now for more years than I can remember, on the day that we sort of recognize how many people are homeless with the annual count. And we had been making progress for many years, and unfortunately this last year went in the wrong direction, and I'm sure now it's even worse. And the threat of homelessness right now under COVID is significant, as so many people are now also out of work, and some of the government supports, particularly at the federal level, are starting to dry up. Housing is fundamental. We know that in terms of mental health, in terms of physical health, in terms of longevity in your life. And so I agree wholeheartedly that housing is basically sort of down right there with food, water, and shelter. Shelter is housing as critical necessities. I have proposed in this campaign, and have spoken out for a couple of years, even before this campaign, that we should be looking to the Trump tax cuts that went to the wealthiest 5% of Vermonters, saving them in Vermont alone over $200 million a year. And my Green Mountain New Deal would say, let's recoup half of that money. Let's tax the wealthiest 5% for about $100 million per year and invest it in many aspects of greening our economy. One of those is about $20 million in additional spending on affordable housing to build affordable and concentrated housing in our town and village centers, so that we can both work on the homelessness situation and create hope and opportunity for a lot of our younger Vermonters who are looking around and trying to figure out how they're going to get jobs they're going to pay enough to equate to the housing costs. Right now, the affordability issue is huge, and the governor talks about it, which is important. We have to recognize it, but the actions still have not really matched the level of need of what's out there. And so this additional $20 million a year for the next multiple years would leverage well over $100 million a year in affordable housing development. And that, to me, is a foundation to create perpetually affordable housing. Another aspect has to do with wages. The governor has vetoed raising the minimum wage twice. Had he not vetoed it the first time, Vermonters who are working for minimum wage today would be making $2,000 more this year. And that would certainly help on some aspects of affordability. That's about $150, $160 a month more, which could go toward housing or food or transportation. When we look at the housing cost, it's both the sort of realities of capitalism and the amount of housing in Vermont relative to the potential buyers, including those from Boston and New York and New Jersey coming out of this COVID experience, buying houses sight unseen, driving up prices. I have an employee who's been trying to buy a house. He puts in a bid above the price, and he still loses to yet another person who puts in a bigger bid, and he's barely making $15 an hour. And he tried to buy a $400,000 house. It is insane what people are trying to do right now because we don't have enough housing and we have to invest more.
Yes, and I was also wondering if you can share with us your thoughts about, and you sort of touched upon this a little bit, about wages in Vermont and what people need to thrive in our state. How would you work to improve the situation for families?
Well, there's a number of different things we need to do. One is continue the wage increases where thankfully the legislature overrode the governor's second veto of raising the minimum wage. So now they are getting step increases above inflation to start to catch them up for the idea of a livable wage. We need to continue that progress. And in my administration, we would push to continue those additional steps so that those who are working full time have the ability to meet their basic needs, a livable wage. But there's a lot of aspects to a livable wage or to an individual being able to live with dignity and their basic needs. And that includes reforming healthcare. I strongly support at least going through a universal primary care system. I've talked with some business owners who in their private insurance plans for their employees, they have augmented those insurance plans with a universal primary care system that they provide with other workplaces nearby. And they have found that they save money on their insurance premiums in fewer than 1 to 3 years by creating a universal primary care system. Because if people go in regularly for checkups, you discover what could be essentially critical long-term health issues much earlier. And by addressing them earlier in their development, it saves huge amounts of money on applying and using the healthcare system. So let's start with universal primary care, show that that can work, show that it saves money, as it has for these businesses, and then move it beyond that into a universal healthcare system. If you do that, you help with economic opportunity for people because they no longer are tied to their job, potentially with healthcare, but some could leave their job and start new businesses, thus creating more jobs. Another major investment in my Green Mountain $20 million a year invested in broadband, putting people to work immediately, creating more jobs and stringing the broadband, and creating far more business opportunities throughout our rural areas for people to live and work in place and make a better living with remote contact anywhere in the world, really, but certainly through to the Boston, New York, New Jersey markets or up to Canada. Again, if people are making better money, living and working in place, they will also be spending that money in the local economy, generating other jobs, helping those small country stores stay open, helping other small businesses start in their area. With my Green Mountain New Deal, I would also be investing in weatherization of working class families' homes and fixed income seniors' homes so that we could lower the bills for those families immediately because they don't have the money up front to invest in the way you need to weatherize. And in weatherizing those homes, we would be creating thousands of jobs in, not fantastic paying, but stable paying $15 to $18 an hour jobs. And finally, another piece of that investment would be in renewable energy, applying solar technology as well as heat pumps to many of those homes. And again, those installation jobs are jobs that the current governor we've seen get lost over these last 4 years because of policies of this administration. Over 500 jobs in solar installation have been lost. So we need to reverse that trend to tackle the climate crisis, to create jobs, and to save struggling Vermonters money.
And our final question for you is around our corrections department. There seems to be consensus among administrators and legislators that there is a culture of negligence and abuse of power manifested in sexual encounters embedded in our correctional facilities and among corrections officers. What would you do as a governor to radically transform the corrections culture so that all are treated with respect and dignity as our faith traditions call for?
Well, thank you. I think the corrections world needs a pretty significant shift and overhaul in its mentality. This country shifted to a lock them up and throw away the key mentality many decades ago, and we've seen our rates of incarceration balloon to the highest in the world. I don't think that is how we ultimately make our communities safer or treat people with the dignity they deserve. Now, certainly some people do horrendous crimes, and those crimes have to be addressed. However, the vast majority of people who are incarcerated have not done massively heinous crimes, and we know, based on their sentencing, they are returning to the community. So we have a number of things we need to do in our incarceration system. One is, as you pointed out, stop the abuse of people who are in the system. The punishment is to be in the system. It does not then warrant our employees to, and it is not all employees, but it is a bit systemic. There's quite a few who do abuse, and we have that evidence in the women's correctional facility. I've heard from folks who are in other facilities that have been abused because they have not done things that they've been told they have to do by corrections officers that are outside. So corrections officers, we also have to look at what are the recruitment policies, who is taking these jobs, what is their training and education before they go in, and when corrections officers do heinous activities, as has been reported in some of our facilities. That's one area we need to take care of. We also need to make sure that we don't cut the community high school of Vermont, again, the way that this current governor has at times proposed, because we need to make sure when folks are coming out of the facilities, they have better tools to then be able to succeed in society. And when I think about this in a bigger overhaul mentality, I look at what's going on in places like Norway and some other innovative countries where while people are incarcerated, they are trained in how to work in certain fields that they are then interested in. They are given education that boosts their ability to succeed when they leave the prison system. And on our whole parole system, we need to do a lot of review and revamping of the parole system and our parole officers. I've talked to people who have come out of jail. They are working, but they have to interrupt work in the middle of the day to go across town to meet with a parole officer. Well, across town without a car is very hard. So then they miss their meeting, and then the spiral starts to go back downhill again. How short-sighted are we to punish those people who are in workplaces trying to get financially stable footing under themselves, that they get put back into the system because they missed a parole meeting because they don't have a car because the parole officer meeting was farther away? Now, there are some very creative businesses, Rhino Fruit, that has a lot of folks in their HR system or someone in their HR system working with these women who came out of the Chittenden County facility to work with them to help on finding housing, on setting up meetings with parole officers, with even driving them to those meetings and so forth. But not every business has the resources to do that. So we need to shift how we operate to make sure those who are coming out have the best chance to succeed, both because of the moral value of helping them do that, but also the selfish value of reducing our costs and our tax burden, because when they fail, it costs all of us. And when they fail because we've set out barriers to success, that's on us.
Thank you. We do have a few moments, if you left over in time, if you'd like to add any other thoughts you'd like to share with those watching today.
Well, I appreciate this time. You know, I know that folks are really focused on the COVID pandemic right now. We're focused on it, not only what it means for each of us in our individual lives, the people we can't see, our loved ones that we can't visit with, older Vermonters can't visit with either their children or their grandchildren. And that is sort of all encompassing right now, that our health and our future and getting through this moment. I think it's really important that we sort of try to take a moment to break out of that mindset as we think about the moment and think about the future. How will we make a better future going forward? How will we tackle the issues we talked about today, racial injustice, homelessness, wage challenges, the incarceration system, and all these other inequities in our society that we touched on briefly? And I would argue you've got two very capable, decent people to choose from in this race. However, if you look at our track record, I have a track record for 20 years of putting forward ideas that are building for the future. They are taking care of the moment and improving the opportunity for our future for all Vermonters, particularly those who are vulnerable and struggling. And so I would ask that you consider putting this set of capable hands in to finish getting us through the COVID crisis, with the assurance that I've made that I would work to keep Dr. Levine on as a steady, stable source of information. Science and health are critically important, and his information has really been what's driven the decisions of the administration. I would continue to keep him in that position so that we would have that continuity. At the same time, I would then bring vision and ideas around tackling the climate crisis, building our economy, particularly in our rural areas, helping struggling Vermonters by raising our minimum wages, and really working on also saving our education system, as the governor shrugged his shoulders when the first proposal came forth to close those 3 state college campuses. That it cannot happen. Those campuses cannot close. They are a beacon of hope for young, struggling Vermonters as a first opportunity to get a higher education. Do they need work and reconfiguration? Yes. Can they close? Absolutely not. They are also critical economic drivers in those regions of the state. So we need someone who's ready to look for opportunities going forward, not someone who simply looks straight at the dollar number and says, oh, well, we just can't do it. I've also brought an idea to the governor to look at ways to save money in government, to be more economically efficient. We have a huge budget in human services and a huge budget in education. And the education costs have been driven by many social service needs for our young people who are coming from many of the circumstances we just talked about. Economic challenged households, homeless households, folks that have been given a different opportunity in life because of the color of their skin. All of these issues are being dealt with as social services in our schools and driving up our education budget. We have money being spent in human services and education where we are overlapping services. We could bring those services together if we go down to those frontline employees, and we could create a better continuum of service for those kids and those families, better outcomes, and save money. So those are the kinds of creative ideas I would bring into your governor. I hope you'll consider me. Reach out at Zuckerman, FORVT.com for more information or to get involved. Again, that's Zuckerman, FORVT.com, Zuckerman for Vermont. And I really appreciate you taking the time to watch through this and get to know me better. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing with us today. All the best in your campaign efforts. And to our folks listening, Election Day is on Tuesday, November 3rd. You can request your mail-in ballot today if you haven't already from the Secretary of State's website or by calling your local town clerk's office. Thank you for watching.